All right, hello. So today we are going to pick up the story of David that we've been going through, the first kings of Israel. So let me share my screen real quick here. If you're watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, and then also reach out to us to get in touch so you can join us in person for fellowship and join in the discussion and all. All right, can you guys see the PowerPoint properly? Good deal. Okay, so we've been going through this series for a little while here. So this is going to be part 9, actually. So we've been doing about one every month or two. We're continuing in our study of the first kings of Israel. And in this study, we're doing something a little bit different, where we mostly just read large sections of scripture and let it do most of the speaking. And today we're picking up the story of King David as recorded in 2 Samuel, starting in chapter 13. This is just after the record of David and Bathsheba, which we went through last session. And, we kind of went through the drama that was involved in that. Now we're going to be getting into some of the drama that was inherent to the family of David, which I think is to be expected since he had at least 8 wives and multiple concubines, and that's bound to lead to some family drama. Okay, so just real quick, kind of looking at David's family. So he's got his wives listed here, and then his children. As you kind of will notice, we've got his wives and concubines listed. This is as was recorded in 2 Samuel and in 1 Chronicles. But we see that he had a son with all but his first wife, Michal. He had 4 with Bathsheba and a total of 9 between his 10 concubines. I think it's interesting to note that, so the second son here listed, Keliab or Daniel, he was the second born, and there's really no place else listed in the Bible other than just to mention him as being a son of David. There's no mention of him anywhere else that I can find. So some have speculated that might mean that he died early. Don't really know on that, but he's not really a part of the story. Seeing that here that David had, at least 18 total wives and concubines, there's really no surprise that that's going to probably lead to some family drama at some point. Also, I wanted to point out that we should keep in mind that Deuteronomy 17:17, it states that the king of Israel shall not multiply wives for himself. And while it doesn't really give a number saying like what would be considered multiplying wives, looking at this list to me makes me think that probably, 8 wives is exceeding the limit of what was intended. Okay, so we're going to pick up the story, 2 Samuel chapter 13, starting at verse 1. And I'm reading today out of the New American Standard Version, but please follow along whatever version you've got handy. Also have it up on the screen if you don't have a Bible handy. Now it was after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so frustrated because of his sister Tamar that he made himself ill, for she was a virgin, and it seemed hard for Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemiah, David's brother, and Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He said to him, "O son of the king, why are you so depressed morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Then Amnon said to him, "I am in love with Tamar, the sister of my brother Absalom." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on the bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me some food to eat, and let her prepare the food in my sight so that I may eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. Then the king came in to see him. Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make me a couple of cakes in my sight that I may eat from her hand." Then David went from the house of Tamar, saying, "Go now to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went into her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down, and she took dough and kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. She took the pan and dished them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Have everyone go out from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the bedroom, that I may eat it from your hand." So Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the bedroom to her brother Amnon. When she brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, my sister." So a lot going on here, but Absalom is stated to have been, or to have had, a beautiful sister. I think by that it's implied that it means it's his full sister. There was a lot of siblings in David's house. Amnon was David's firstborn son, and he had this tremendous lust for his half-sister Tamar. She's stated to be very beautiful. So Amnon, he has this deceitful, feigned illness, and requests his half-sister Tamar to come and bake for him, and then afterwards he propositions her with this ungodly, unrighteous request. So continuing on, verse 12, but she answered him, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. As for me, where could I get rid of my reproach? And as for you, you'll be like one of the fools in Israel. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." However, he would not listen to her. Since he was stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her and with a very great hatred, for the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go away." But she said to him, "No, because this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other which you have done to me." Yet he would not listen to her. Then he called his young men who had attended him and said, "Now throw this woman out of my presence and lock the door behind her." Now she had on a long-sleeved garment, for in this manner the virgin daughters of the king dressed themselves in robes. Then his attendant took her out and locked the door behind her. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her long-sleeved garment which was on her. She also put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Then Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? But now keep silent, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this matter to heart." So Tamar remained and was desolate in her brother Absalom's house. Now when David heard of all these matters, he was very angry. But Absalom did not speak to Amnon, either good or bad. For Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. So just to kind of recap here. So and we do note that Tamar firmly pushed back against her half-brother's advances and requests, and asked that he request of the king, which was their father, for permission for his desire to be with her. Amnon instead, forced himself upon Tamar, which is half-sister. After this, his lustful desire quickly turned to disdain and hatred, and had Tamar thrown out of his presence. Obviously, after this, Tamar is very upset and goes out after this shameful incident. She tears her garment, puts her hand on her head, all that. That obviously catches the attention of Absalom, and she ends up staying at his house. So what's interesting here is I see that it's stated that King David was very angry upon hearing these things, but there's no mention of him taking any action. Amnon was the firstborn and would have been expected to be the heir of the kingdom. Unfortunately, here we see that he, like his father, committed a great sin out of lust. As we remember just our last session, David with Bathsheba had a similar thing going on. So this was probably something that David was giving him a little bit of more leeway, being that he was the heir. He didn't want to take action against his son, being that he was a future heir. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here, but it just really doesn't say. He just kind of says that he was upset about it. Absalom, didn't take any immediate action either, but it says he basically hated his half-brother Amnon because of what he had done to his sister. So a lot going on here, a lot of family drama. This is going to really make things awkward within David's household, obviously, going forward forever. It's not really something that you just bounce back from. Okay, so continuing on in chapter 13, we're going to go to verse 22. Now it came about after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold now, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, we should not all go. We will be burdensome to you." Although he urged him, he would not go, but blessed him. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" But when Absalom urged him, he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Absalom commanded his servant, saying, "See now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, 'Strike Amnon,' then put him to death. Do not fear. Have not I myself commanded you? Be courageous and valiant." The servants of Absalom did to Amnon just as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. Now it was while they were on the way that the report came to David, saying, "Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left." The king arose, tore his clothes, and lay on the ground, and all of his servants were standing by with clothes torn. Jonadab, the son of Shemiah, David's brother, responded, "Do not let my lord suppose that they have put to death all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead, because by the intent of Absalom, this has been determined since the day that he violated his sister Tamar. Now, therefore, do not let the Lord my king take the report to heart, namely, all the king's sons are dead, for only Amnon is dead." So we see here that this had, kind of had time to settle down in full 2 years, but Absalom had this hate in his heart during that time, and he kind of saw that this was his time to take action to be able to kill his brother Amnon. So he gets this, kind of clever and crafty plan to get Amnon away from David's protection. And once he's killed, obviously all the other siblings, they take off. They don't know what's going on. And David gets this report, and when he hears it, he immediately believes that Absalom would have murdered all of his brothers. So it tells you a little bit about the family dynamic here, that David is willing to just immediately believe that Absalom would just kill all of the other brothers, which back in those days with kings and their children, it would be kind of more common, I suppose, for a brother to want to kill his other brothers, because that could eliminate, anyone trying to become the heir to the throne. If you're the only one left, you obviously become the heir. So here we have King David. Even though with all of his authority as king of Israel, he has this tremendous amount of family drama going on. It's so far, one of his sons raped his half sister, which was David's daughter, and then was killed by his half brother, another of David's sons, obviously. So when you think about it and step back, the family tension and the drama that we're seeing here, it rivals any well-crafted fictional drama that you might go through. It's just so much going on here. Going to chapter 14, starting at verse 1. Now, Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was inclined towards Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there and said to her, "Please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments now, and do not anoint yourself with oil, but be like a woman who has been mourning for the dead many days. Then go to the king and speak to him in this manner." So Joab put the words in her mouth. Now when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell down on her face and prostrated herself and said, "Help, O king." The king said to her, "What is your trouble?" And she answered, "Truly I am a widow, for my husband is dead. Your maidservant had 2 sons, but the 2 of them struggled together in the field, and there was no one to separate them. So one struck the other and killed him. Now behold, the whole family has arisen against your maidservant, and they say, 'Hand over the one who struck his brother, that way he may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed, and destroy the heir also.' Thus they will extinguish my coal which is left, so as to leave my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth." And the king said to the woman, "Go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you." Okay, so Joab here, and to reminder, he's the nephew of David. He's also the commander of the Israeli army. So he's a crafty and strategic planner. And he decided to work to bring Absalom back home after he's, murdered his brother and, the firstborn who would have been the heir to the kingdom. He's working to bring him back home. So he, has this kind of crafty plan of sending this woman to David to describe a situation similar enough to that of Absalom to make the desired point that he's that Absalom should basically not be killed just because he killed his brother. Okay, so going down to verse 12. Then the woman said, "Please let your maidservant speak a word to the Lord my king." And he said, "Speak." The woman said, "Why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in speaking this word, the king is as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring back his vanished one," being Absalom, of course. Skipping down to verse 21. Then the king said to Joab, "Behold, now I will surely do this thing. Go therefore, bring back the young man Absalom." Joab fell on his face to the ground, prostrated himself, and blessed the king. Then Joab said, "Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, O my lord the king, and that the king has performed the request of his servant." So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. However, the king said, "Let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face." So Absalom turned to his own house and did not see the king's face. Now in all Israel was no one as handsome as Absalom. So highly praised from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no defect in him. When he cut the hair of his head, and it was at the end of every year that he cut it, for it was heavy on him, so he cut it, he weighed the hair on his head at 200 shekels by the king's weight. To Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem and did not see the king's face. Okay, so David, after hearing this woman's story that was devised by Joab, he decided to allow Joab to bring Absalom back home. However, he didn't want to see him in person still. Obviously, David's very upset that his other son was murdered by Absalom, but Absalom is allowed to return back in to the area, back to his own home, but basically David doesn't want to have anything to do with them. It's interesting side note here, Absalom was said to be the most handsome man in all of Israel, and that he had very impressive hair, which is a kind of odd thing you think about in the scripture, but it'll make more sense in a little bit if you're not familiar with the story. But it trimmed off 200 shekels, and best I can tell, that's roughly 5 pounds or 2.2 kilograms of annual hair growth. So very impressive hair. But yeah, he's back in Jerusalem 2 years, but not allowed to see the king, his father, David. All right, verse 29, chapter 14. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. So he sent a second time, and he would not come. Therefore he said to his servants, "See, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and came to Absalom at his house and said to him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom answered Joab, "Behold, I sent for you, saying, 'Come here, that I may send you to the king,' to say, 'Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there. Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there is iniquity in me, let him put me to death.' So when Joab came to the king and told him, he called for Absalom. Thus he came to the king and prostrated himself on his face to the ground before the king and kissed Absalom. So this is after a couple years, Absalom being back, not getting to see the king. He becomes a little bit bolder again, and he sends for Joab, and Joab just kind of ignores him, refuses to go. And after a second time of that, Absalom gets to be a little bit more forceful, and he just lights his field on fire to get his attention. And that worked. Joab decided to go and see what's going on once that happened. And Absalom was able to persuade Joab to go and entreat the king to see him again, which he did. And you see a little bit of the relationship being restored here between David and his son Absalom. Okay, so continuing on, chapter 15, starting at verse 1. Now it came about that after this, that Absalom provided for himself a chariot and horses and 50 men as runners before him. Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way to the gate, and when any man had a suit to come to the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And he would say, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but no man listens to you on the part of the king." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that one would appoint me as judge in the land. Then every man who has any suit or cause would come to me, and I would give him justice." And when a man came near to prostrate himself before him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom dealt with all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole away the hearts of the men of Israel. So we see here, after at least a somewhat restored relationship with his father David, the king, Absalom decided to take advantage of the situation. He gets himself this big chariot, all these horses and men to kind of make him look impressive. And then in this manipulative way, we see that he kind of uses propaganda and, he stole away the hearts of the men of Israel by persistently telling them that if he was to be, the judge of the land, then they would get better justice than David's doing. Kind of just an underhanded way of undermining David's authority and his justice, and basically claiming that he would do better as king. Chapter 15, starting at verse 10, we're going to continue on. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" Then 200 men went with Absalom from Jerusalem, who were invited and went innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city Gilo, while he was offering sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. Then a messenger came to David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." David said to his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise, let us flee, for otherwise none of us will escape from Absalom. Go in haste, or he will overtake us quickly and bring down calamity on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." Then the king's servant said to the king, "Behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king chooses." So the king went out and all his household with him, but the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. Okay, so this is quite a turn here. Absalom's his diabolical plan has continued to take shape in his attempt to usurp the throne from his father David. He sent for David's counselor, and then he sent spies throughout the people to tell them that when they heard the sound of the trumpet, that meant that Absalom would be the king, and basically he's going to take over the kingdom here. David is warned of this impending conspiracy, and he just decides to leave the city. He kind of knows already that the people have already, their hearts are already turned to Absalom, and they like him. They think he's a strong leader. He's obviously very handsome, has the great hair, and he just packs up his household and he kind of abandons his home and his city of Jerusalem and takes off. He doesn't want to be killed. I think it is interesting to note here that he basically just has no doubt that to think that Absalom's going to come and strike them all down and strike down the whole city. So makes me think he knows something more about the heart of Absalom than even the passage here, the narrative tells us. Kind of what's going on in the background, David seems to know very clearly as well. It's no surprise to him. Okay, 2 Samuel 15, starting at verse 30. David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went. And his head was covered, and he walked barefoot. Then all the people who were with him each covered his head and went up weeping as they went. Now someone told David, saying, "Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom." And David said, "O Lord, I pray, make the counsel of Ahithophel foolishness." It happened as David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, that behold, Hushai the Archite met him with his coat torn and dust on his head. David said to him, "If you pass over with me, then you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so I will now be your servant, then you can thwart the counsel of Ahithophel for me. Are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? So it shall be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall report to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are there with them, Ahimaaz and Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, and by them you shall send me everything that you hear." So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. This is pretty sad for David and his servants. They're weeping, they're barefoot, their heads are covered, they're going out. David gets told that one of his main advisors, Ahithophel, has just gone and joined in with Absalom. And obviously David worried about that because he does not want Absalom to be successful. So he prays. I think it's interesting here to note that one of the things that David does immediately, he prays and requests of God to make the counsel foolishness, that it won't be a help to Absalom. Also, we have one of his friends join up here, and he asked him to go and pretend to be a counsel to Absalom, but to secretly be a spy and to secretly give bad counsel to Absalom. So there's some pretty smart behaviors that's taking part of David. Number one, he is seeking God and his help. He's also, you got to remember, David is a very good military leader. He's a great warrior, and he immediately is, sending in spies to, basically work against Absalom as he's trying to take over the kingdom. And he sends in one of his counselors to go and be a bad counselor. Okay, going down to chapter 16, verse 15. Then Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, entered Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with them. Now it came about when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" Then Hushai said to Absalom, "No, for whom the Lord, this people, and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Besides, whom should I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son? As I have served in your father's presence, so I will be in your presence." So Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give your advice. What shall we do?" Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house. Then all of Israel will hear that you have made yourself odious to your father. The hands of all who are with you will also be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Again, a lot going on here. Absalom, he enters Jerusalem. This would have been David's city, and he has David's prior advisor with him. Hushai, David's friend, seems to be able to pretty easily deceive Absalom into believing that he's deserted David and is going to serve him instead. Ahithophel gave Absalom some, what I would say, absolutely terrible advice. He tells him to go into his father's concubines, which he did. Absalom, as at this point of the narrative, is essentially acting as the king. David's kind of left his city. Absalom's got the king's advisors. He's taken over the king's house, his concubines. He has the support of all the people of Israel because he had these deceitful and shrewd tactics that he's used. On the flip side, David, meanwhile, he's left Jerusalem with his loyal servants. He's, of course, very upset and again on the move to avoid being killed. And this must have been reminiscent for David of him having to flee from the king Saul, which was his father-in-law. And now it's even worse since it's its own son that's seeking his life and usurping the throne instead of respectfully waiting to inherit it. David, though, we see remained a faithful follower of God. He's reaching out to God in this time. All right, so kind of to summarize what all we've gone over here. There was obviously some abundant family drama between David's children. I mean, that's a massive understatement. Most notable was that between the siblings with different mothers. Amnon, who's David's firstborn, committed a serious sin by raping his half-sister. Then Absalom likewise committed a very serious sin by murdering his half-brother. This is some crazy family dynamics going on here. David, we see, was multiple times unwilling to act against those that did something evil. We previously saw in some other sessions that he overlooked Joab's murder of Abner, and both Amnon and Absalom's sins were overlooked instead of punished. It says David was angered by things, but he didn't actually take any action. I think something else to point out is so David, for much of his life, he's surrounded by conflict and danger with family members seeking his life. So earlier, and we've gone through a bunch of this, was his father-in-law Saul for a long time was pursuing David and trying to kill him. Later on, Saul's son Ishbosheth, which would have been David's brother-in-law at a point. And now later, again, we've got Absalom, his own son. He's committed treason and usurped the throne for himself, and David's on the run. He doesn't want to be killed. Most importantly, though, I think to take away from this is that David remained a servant of Yahweh, his God, and continued to seek God's help. Also, David didn't just give up. He didn't just surrender and say it's over. He is taking some actions by sending, his friend in to be a spy and a bad counselor. He's not done yet. So I know we typically try to give some practical application points. This section, I don't know if there's a whole lot of really easy practical application points to make, but I think one that's self-evident to me anyway is that David, with all his responsibility of running the kingdom, and then he had his time split between 18 women and many, many children, I think he probably didn't have as much time to spend with his kids and bring them up in the ways of the Lord as he should have. So I think the family issues that were present suggest that perhaps David, didn't raise his children to be faithful servants of God as much as he could have. Probably just by the sheer amount of obligations that he had would have made that very difficult. I think also David, in his history of having lust for women and multiple women, that probably caused a very difficult family dynamic that didn't need to take place. It's not specifically noted in the text. That's just kind of things that I'm pulling out that logically makes sense to me, just kind of looking through it, reading through it, and going through my own experiences in life. So, but I think at the end of the day, we can all look to David as someone that did remain faithful to God and did not, walk away from it despite all of the difficulties. But I think something practical to pull out is that no matter how difficult our life gets, no matter how much we feel like family's not there to support us, nothing else is working out, everything's going bad, we can still lean on God and continue to serve him. And that is the right way to act. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the slideshow here. Stop sharing my screen. I'm gonna go ahead and close out the recording. So if you're watching the recording and get to join us live, please join us live next time. We'd love to have you.